No one ever said it would be easy to be a woman in the business world, but lately, it felt impossible. I sat at the head of the long conference table, looking at the partners of my family's company. My grandfather, the founder, had his hands crossed over the table, watching me with his stern and calculating expression. I had spent years preparing for this moment, to finally take on a leadership role. But of course there was a condition. There always was. "Claire, you are brilliant. Your vision for the company is exceptional," my grandfather began, his voice hoarse and imposing. "But investors are conservative. They want stability. They want to know you have a solid structure." I already knew where this was going. "They want to know you have a husband." I closed my eyes for a second, suppressing the urge to roll them. "You're kidding," I murmured, even though I already knew the answer. "Claire, you know how it works," my mother intervened, giving me a look that said, "Just accept it. You are in the perfect position to take on this role, but perception matters." Does perception matter more than my competence? In the business world, perception and competence go hand in hand. I took a deep breath. I had been through so many meetings where I had to prove, more than any man in the room, that I was capable. But this was just ridiculous. "And if I say I'm dating someone," I suggested, crossing my arms. "Great, but an engagement would be better. A marriage would be perfect." "Great, perfect." My mind was already racing. Dating someone? I barely had time to sleep, let alone build a relationship from scratch. I didn't trust anyone enough to share my life, and honestly, I didn't want to. My career was my priority. But if that was what they wanted, I would find a way. That night, sitting on the couch in my Manhattan penthouse, a plan began to take shape. If the problem was perception, then I would change the perception. I needed a husband, but not just anyone. I needed someone convincing, charismatic, and above all, someone who wouldn't get too involved. With a glass of wine in hand and my laptop on my lap, I discreetly researched elite escort services. The idea was absurd, of course, but it was also efficient. I chose a reputable agency, specializing in select clients, and sent a specific request. "I need someone to play my husband for a few months. Discreet, sophisticated, convincing, generous payment." The response came the next day. One name: Ethan Carter. The photo attached to the email was of a tall man with dark hair and deep blue eyes. He had that kind of charm that could melt any resistance, a mischievous smile and a posture that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing." But I wouldn't get carried away. This was just business, right? If I said I wasn't nervous, I would be lying. I had closed big deals, dealt with demanding investors, and led crucial meetings without blinking. But none of that prepared me for waiting for a man who, technically, I had hired to pretend to be my husband. The restaurant was sophisticated, discreet, the kind of place where executives closed million-dollar deals while sipping absurdly expensive wines. I chose a private corner where we could talk without drawing attention. The clock struck 7:02 p.m. when he walked in. Ethan Carter. If I expected his photo to be exaggerated, I was completely mistaken. He was even more impressive in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, in a perfectly tailored dark suit. But it was his confidence that really caught me off guard. He didn't hesitate, didn't search for my gaze as if uncertain. He simply walked up to me as if he had known me for years. "Claire Donovan," he said, smiling slightly as he pulled out the chair and sat across from me without needing an invitation. "I found your request interesting." I crossed my legs and leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone professional. "And you accepted too quickly for someone who found it interesting." He chuckled softly, leaning forward. "What can I say? I like challenges." His eyes studied me, assessing every movement I made. I felt tested, as if he were trying to measure how much I could take before losing control of the situation. But I wouldn't lose. "You already know the terms," I began. "It's a simple contract. You will be my husband at events, family gatherings, and social situations that require me to have a partner. We need to look convincing, but nothing more than that." Sounds easy. And it is. He tilted his head as if analyzing my response. "Do you really believe that?" My stomach churned at the implication, but I maintained my impassive expression. "I'm hiring you for a service, Ethan. Just that." He smiled again, that kind of smile that seemed to hide secrets. "Of course. Just a service." The way he said it bothered me more than it should have. As if he knew something I didn't. As if he had played this game before and was just waiting to see when I would lose. But I wouldn't lose. Because this was just a contract. Right? If I thought hiring Ethan Carter would be the hard part, I clearly underestimated the very game I created. In the days that followed, we aligned basic details, how we met, how long we had been married, small information we needed to memorize to seem convincing. But today would be the real test. The event was a business dinner with investors and board members of my family's company. I needed Ethan to prove he was the ideal husband. Only I still didn't know he would do it with irritating ease. As soon as we entered the ballroom of the luxurious hotel in Midtown, I felt the eyes turn toward us. My grandfather was there, my mother, the partners, everyone watching closely. And then Ethan did something unexpected. He took my hand. My body tensed for a moment, but his hand was warm, firm, as if to say, "Trust me." I didn't trust him, but for God's sake, he was convincing. "Relax," he murmured close to my ear, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "If you seem uncomfortable, they'll notice." I took a deep breath and squeezed his arm, forcing myself to get into character. As we approached my grandfather, Ethan confidently extended his hand. "Mr. Donovan, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Claire talks a lot about you." "I do?" My grandfather scrutinized him with his usual critical gaze before shaking his hand. "I hope it's only good things." Ethan laughed, relaxed, as if he were sitting at a bar with friends. "I'd say they're impressive. She admires you. I can see why." Pause. My grandfather raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised that Ethan didn't seem intimidated at all. But instead of questioning him, he simply nodded, satisfied. And it was like that with everyone. Ethan seemed to know exactly what to say, how to smile, how to make people like him effortlessly. He was charming, confident, captivating. Even my mother, who had always been hard to impress, looked at him approvingly. And then, there was a moment. We were talking with a group of investors when I felt his hand slide to the small of my back. A subtle touch, natural, but it made my skin tingle. I pretended it didn't affect me. "Claire and I have always believed that innovation and tradition can go hand in hand," he said, responding to a question from one of the businessmen, while his touch lingered there, burning against my skin, even over the fabric of my dress. He knew exactly what he was doing. When dinner ended and we stepped outside to get the car, I pulled away before he could touch me again. "You're good at this," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Ethan smiled, leaning in a little closer to me. "Good at what?" I crossed my arms. "Pretending, making everyone believe." He shrugged, amused. "I don't know what you're talking about. All I did was act like a loving husband." There was a mischievous glint in his eyes, a silent challenge. "You overdid it," I retorted. "Overdid it?" "Yes, that hand on my back, for example. It wasn't necessary." He leaned in a bit more, his voice dropping to a dangerously low tone. "Oh, Claire, if it were real, I would have done much more than that." My heart skipped involuntarily, but I ignored it. I needed to pull myself together. The business dinner had been a success, my family was pleased, and the investors finally seemed to see me as someone capable of leading the company. That was exactly what I wanted. The plan was working. So why was I thinking about Ethan's touch? The answer was simple. He was making everything difficult. Our interactions intensified after that night. We needed to rehearse our dynamic better, spend more time together so nobody doubted our marriage. At least, that's what I told myself to justify his presence in my life beyond the events. Ethan didn't seem to mind. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying himself. "Are you avoiding me, Claire?" he asked one night, leaning against my kitchen counter, watching me make coffee as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. I scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" He raised an eyebrow and took a few steps closer. "Then why is it that every time I get near, you hold your breath?" I stopped stirring the coffee. He was teasing me, provoking, just like he always did. I turned to face him, keeping my expression impassive. "Maybe I just don't like physical contact." Ethan smiled sideways, as if I had told an obvious lie. Funny, because at dinner you seemed quite comfortable." I crossed my arms, determined not to let him win this one. You went too far that night. Did I? He took another step, and my body reacted before my mind did. I felt the heat radiating from him, that unsettling and dominant presence that made me question what exactly I was trying to prove. I lowered my gaze to my coffee cup, as if it were the most important thing in the world at that moment. Don't worry, Claire, he murmured, and there was something different in his tone now. Something less teasing, more serious. I know what the limits are. Limits. The question was, did I know? In the days that followed, everything grew even more confusing. Small gestures became too big. A touch on the arm during an event. A lingering glance when we laughed at something. A smile that lasted longer than it should. The problem was that Ethan Carter was good at what he did. He knew how to be effortlessly seductive, how to create a tension that shouldn't exist. But above all, he knew how to unsettle me. And the worst part? I was starting to like it. If I had a little more sense, I would keep Ethan at a distance. I would set clear boundaries, remind myself that he was a hired hand, that this was all just a well-rehearsed act. But Ethan seemed determined to test those limits. And with each passing day, I felt less inclined to resist. You're nervous, he said one night as we walked together to a company event. I'm not. He smiled, that smile loaded with challenge. You always fiddle with the ring when you're nervous. Instinctively, I let go of the fake engagement ring I had been spinning on my finger. I'm not nervous, Ethan. Sure. He looked at me as if he could see right through me. Just bothered by my presence. I crossed my arms, exasperated. Why do you always have to provoke me? Because I like to see you trying to pretend you're not enjoying it. My mouth opened, ready to retort, but he simply smiled and opened the car door for me, like a perfect gentleman. And so it continued throughout the event. Ethan knew how to play the game. He threw me subtle smiles while talking to investors, lightly brushed his hand against my waist as he guided me through the hall, and whispered comments that made me blush without anyone noticing. And then it happened. I stepped away for a moment to take a phone call, and when I returned, I saw him talking to another woman. She was beautiful, elegant, clearly interested in him. And Ethan, well, Ethan was naturally charming. There was no reason for it to bother me, but it did. I crossed my arms, watching from a distance. She laughed at something he said, leaning in closer. It was ridiculous how my stomach twisted. Before I could think, I approached and slid my hand possessively down his arm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Love, I'm thirsty. Can you get me a glass of wine? My voice came out sweet, almost casual. But my eyes met his in a silent challenge. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. But then, something in his gaze changed. Slowly and deliberately, he wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me closer. Of course, dear. His voice was low, laced with amusement. The woman watched us for a moment before saying goodbye and leaving. But Ethan still didn't let me go. Are you jealous, Claire? His voice sounded dangerously playful. I quickly stepped back, regaining my composure. You're a hired hand. Remember that. He smiled. You're the one who came to me, love. I turned away before he could see the flush on my cheeks. But one thing was clear. Ethan was winning this game, and I didn't know if I really wanted him to stop. I needed control that I clearly no longer had. After the event, I tried to convince myself that Ethan was just playing. He was a professional escort, after all. Creating chemistry, seduction, and closeness was part of the job. But then came the night that changed everything. We were at my apartment, going over some details of the contract. It should have been a quick, straightforward conversation. But, as always, Ethan loved to turn everything into a game. Do you really take yourself seriously all the time? He asked, watching me over the glass of whiskey he had poured for himself. That's how you survive in my world. How interesting. He tilted his head, studying me. Because with me, it seems like you forget that from time to time. I rolled my eyes. You're being too full of yourself. He smiled sideways, that annoyingly smug smile. Tell me I'm wrong. I ignored the provocation and stood up, ready to end the conversation. But before I could walk away, Ethan held my wrist with a firm but not aggressive grip, enough to make me stop. The silence between us stretched, My breath hitched in my chest as he leaned in slowly, not letting go of my hand. My heart was pounding too hard. Claire. He said my name as if he were testing me, as if he were challenging me to stop him from continuing. But I didn't stop him. I should have pulled away, reminded him and myself of the rules of this agreement. But before I knew it, I was trapped there between him and the living room table, feeling the heat radiating from his body, feeling his breath so close to mine. And then, he kissed me. There was no hesitation, no space for doubt. It was intense, deep, filled with repressed desire, as if we had both been waiting for this and finally decided to give in. My mind screamed that it was a mistake. My body said otherwise. Only when I desperately needed air could I pull away. Ethan looked at me in a way that made my stomach flip, like he knew exactly what that meant. I swallowed hard, trying to regain my composure. My voice came out shaky. This can't happen again. Ethan ran his tongue over his lips as if savoring the moment. If you say so. But he didn't seem convinced. And deep down, neither was I. I made a mistake. And it wasn't just because Ethan kissed me. It was because I wanted it. Because I could still taste him on my lips. Because since that night, my mind refused to think of anything else. So, I did what I always did when something threatened the control I so valued. I built up walls. In the following days, I kept my distance. I avoided unnecessary conversations, prolonged interactions, anything that brought us closer than necessary to sustain our lie. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. "Tell me something, Claire," he asked one night as he accompanied me to an event. "How long do you think you can avoid me?" "I'm not avoiding you." "Oh, really?" He smiled sideways. "Then why is it that every time I get close, you hold your breath?" I rolled my eyes and kept walking. He loved to provoke me, but I wouldn't give in. Or at least, that's what I thought until everything crumbled. The problem came in the form of a man from my past, Lucas Haynes, an ex-boyfriend I hadn't seen in years, but who apparently still harbored resentments. He was a powerful investor, and that night, he was at the same event as me and Ethan. Claire Donovan. His voice carried that slightly sarcastic tone I knew all too well. Long time no see. I took a deep breath before turning around. Lucas, what a surprise. His eyes scanned Ethan, evaluating him. "So this is your husband?" he said, not even trying to hide his disbelief. "Interesting." Ethan smiled, but it was a dangerous smile. "Interesting? What do you mean by that?" Lucas stepped closer, crossing his arms. "I'm just surprised because Claire never mentioned you before. And I still have some pretty close contacts to her family." My stomach twisted. He was testing me, looking for a crack. "We got married recently." My voice came out strong, but Lucas didn't seem convinced. "Really?" He smirked. "Because honestly, this feels more like a deal than a real marriage." The air around me grew heavy. My heart raced. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. Ethan remained unfazed. Instead, he chuckled softly and wrapped a possessive arm around my waist. "You know, Lucas, it's funny how some people just can't move on." Lucas narrowed his eyes, and for a moment I feared it would escalate into something bigger. But he just smiled and stepped back. Let's see how long this charade lasts. My body remained tense even after he left. Ethan looked at me. He knows. My throat was dry. He can't prove anything. But he can plant doubts. I swallowed hard. He was right. Everything I had built could crumble because of this. And for the first time, I wondered if the biggest risk wasn't just losing my credibility, but losing Ethan too. Lucas didn't need proof. He just needed to plant the right doubt in the right person, and the damage would be done. And that's exactly what he did. The morning after the event, my mom called me. "Claire, what's going on?" I blinked, trying to compose myself. "What do you mean?" "I just got a call from your Uncle Robert. He heard rumors that your marriage isn't exactly real." My stomach churned. Where did he get that? It seems Lucas Haynes made some comments to the right people. "Claire, you know how these things work. If this story spreads, investors will question your credibility. Your grandfather will question your ability to lead." My fingers tightened around the phone. I'll handle it. I hope so. She hung up, and I let out a heavy sigh. I needed a few minutes to regain my composure before looking for Ethan. He was at my apartment, as always, leaning against the kitchen counter, a coffee in hand, and that calm expression that irritated me because I hadn't felt anything like it lately. We have a problem. I got straight to the point. Ethan watched me calmly, taking a sip of his coffee before responding. Let me guess. Lucas. I nodded. He let out a sigh and placed the cup in the sink before approaching me. Claire, you knew something like this could happen. Yes, but not this quickly. So, what do you want to do? I bit my lower lip, pondering. I needed to reinforce our lie, make our relationship even more convincing. But there was something inside me that hesitated. Because after the kiss, after all the teasing, something felt different. We could get married for real. The words slipped out before I could fully process them. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. You mean a legal marriage? Yes, temporary, of course. We can sign a contract establishing a specific duration. If we're legally married, no one can question anything. He crossed his arms, studying me in silence. Is this really about the investors or about what you felt when Lucas insinuated that I wasn't your husband? My breath hitched for a second. Don't complicate things, Ethan. I'm not complicating. I just want to understand how far you're willing to go to uphold this lie. I fell silent. Because at that moment, a question echoed within me. Was it really a lie? Ethan stepped closer, his gaze piercing mine. Tell me the truth, Claire. Do you really want this marriage just for the contract? My mouth opened, but no answer came. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure. Ethan's words echoed in my mind for days. Do you really want this marriage just for the contract? If it were a few weeks ago, I would have answered without hesitation. But now I didn't know anymore. The problem was that the contract was about to end, and when that happened, everything would go back to normal. Ethan would leave my life, which supposedly was the plan all along. So why did the idea bother me so much? Claire? I looked up and found Ethan standing in the doorway of my office. He was serious, without that cocky smile he usually had. We need to talk. I nodded and got up, going to him. My heart was beating too fast, and I hated that he had this effect on me. We headed to the building's balcony where the New York night air felt heavy in a different way that evening. Ethan turned to me, crossing his arms. What do you want, Claire? I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He sighed. The contract is ending. We can just move on, pretend nothing happened, and end it. Or... My chest tightened. Or... Ethan stepped closer, close enough for me to smell his woodsy scent, for my body to remember what it was like to be near him. Or we can admit that it wasn't just a contract for both of us. My heart raced. There it was, the choice I knew I would have to make. If I took a step back, everything would go back to how it was before. I would keep my control, my career, my perfectly organized life. But if I chose Ethan, I didn't know where that would lead us. And maybe that was exactly what made it all so frightening. Because for the first time in a long time, I wanted to take the risk. I wanted him. I had never been the type to hesitate. I always knew exactly what I wanted and how to get it. But in that moment, looking at Ethan, I felt torn between two versions of myself. The rational Claire, who built her career with discipline and control, knew that the safe choice was to end this contract and move on. But the Claire that Ethan awakened, she wanted to stay. Claire. His voice was calm, but there was weight in it. He wanted an answer. My heart hammered in my chest. He was giving me a real choice. Not a contract, not an agreement, but something I couldn't foresee or control. And that's when I realized the truth. The contract may have started as a lie, but what we had grown together was not. I took a deep breath, summoning all the courage I normally use to close billion-dollar deals. Only this time, I was risking something far more valuable. I don't want this to end. Ethan's eyes sparkled for a moment before he took another step toward me. Then tell me, Claire, is this still a game for you? I swallowed hard and shook my head. No. Ethan studied me for a moment, as if he wanted to make sure I really understood what I was saying. Then, with no more hesitation, He pulled me by the waist and kissed me. This time, there were no barriers between us. It wasn't a rehearsed act to deceive investors or a trick to seem convincing. It was real. And deep down, maybe it always had been. When we pulled away, Ethan smiled against my lips. Great, because this time, I'm not accepting a contract as an answer. I let out a weak laugh, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I had spent my whole life thinking I needed control to succeed. But sometimes the best things happen when we finally decide to let go. Did you like the story? What would you do in Claire's place? Leave your comment and tell me what you think. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories.